When neighbor Rick built a fence right across Jonathan's property, he thought his ties with the HOA would let him get away with it. His arrogance and manipulative tactics, including dismissing evidence and silencing complaints, sparked outrage among the neighbors. But Jonathan and his lawyer uncovered a game-changing piece of evidence that turned everything around. Just wait until you hear how this intense battle ended with justice served. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air carries a subtle chill, but the golden sunlight makes everything feel alive. Jonathan Rivers sat in his cozy kitchen, savoring the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Through the window, he could see the vibrant orange and red leaves carpeting his backyard, a space he'd always cherished as his personal sanctuary. With a deep breath, coffee mug in hand, Jonathan decided to step outside and enjoy the peaceful view. But as he turned the corner of his house, the serene image he expected to see was replaced by something entirely unexpected. A brand new fence, tall, imposing, and completely out of place, cut straight through the middle of his yard. The wooden structure wasn't just an eyesore, it was a blatant intrusion. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. This wasn't right. This couldn't be right. Setting his mug down on the porch railing, Jonathan marched toward the fence. As he got closer, voices reached his ears, sharp, commanding tones mingled with the sounds of hammers and saws. Peering over the fence, he spotted his neighbor, Rick Turner, standing amidst a group of workers, pointing and gesturing with an air of authority. "Rick," Jonathan called, his voice firm but tinged with disbelief. Rick turned, his face lighting up with a smug grin that immediately set Jonathan's nerves on edge. Morning, Jonathan," he said, waving casually as if nothing was amiss. "What's going on here?" Jonathan demanded, gesturing toward the fence. Rick sauntered over, hands on his hips, radiating confidence. "This? Oh, just a little improvement project. Turns out, this part of the yard is actually on my property. Figured it was time to set the boundaries straight." Jonathan felt a wave of anger and confusion. "That's not true," he said firmly. "This land has been part of my property for decades. My father even put up a hedge to mark the boundary when I was a kid. You can't just—" Rick interrupted with a dismissive chuckle. "Look, Jonathan, I checked the HOA map and it's all there. This area was up for debate and, frankly, you should have kept better records. It's nothing personal, just business." Jonathan's fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't just an overstep. It was a blatant land grab. The land had been in his family for over 30 years, a legacy passed down from his father, who had meticulously documented every detail of the property lines. Rick's claim was absurd, and Jonathan knew it. But Rick didn't stop there. "Tell you what," he added, leaning in conspiratorially. "If it really bothers you, maybe we can work something out. I could let you use this space for a small fee. Neighborly compromise." Jonathan stared at him, stunned. A fee? For his own land? He could feel his blood boiling, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Rick, this isn't over," he said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. As Jonathan walked back to his house, the reality of the situation sank in. His peaceful sanctuary had been invaded, and his neighbor's audacity knew no bounds. Jonathan set his coffee mug on the kitchen counter, his mind racing. He needed to act quickly, but where to begin? Looking out the window at the fence that now marred his backyard, he resolved to fight this injustice. Rick might have thought he could manipulate the situation, but Jonathan wasn't about to back down. This wasn't just about a fence, it was about standing up for what was right. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Jonathan sat at his kitchen table, the comforting smell of coffee lingering in the air, but his focus was entirely on the stack of documents before him. He flipped through old property records, maps, and deeds, each one a reminder of the careful stewardship his father had maintained over their land. Finally, he found it, a survey from 10 years ago, with precise measurements confirming the boundary lines. With the folder tucked under his arm, Jonathan made his way to the HOA office, hoping for a straightforward resolution. The small building felt as indifferent as its occupant, Martha Grayson, the HOA president. Her desk was cluttered with papers, and she greeted Jonathan with a raised eyebrow. "Martha, I need your help," Jonathan began, placing the folder on her desk. "Rick Turner has built a fence on my property, and I have the documents to prove it." Martha glanced briefly at the folder, but didn't touch it. "Rick already mentioned this. He says the HOA maps support his claim. Honestly, Jonathan, it's better if you handle this privately. We don't want unnecessary tension in the neighborhood. Jonathan's frustration rose. You haven't even looked at the documents. This isn't a dispute. It's a clear violation of property boundaries. Martha leaned back in her chair, her expression a mix of impatience and dismissal. Rick's fence looks fine to me, and we're not here to micromanage every little complaint. The casual dismissal stung, but Jonathan kept his composure. Fine, he said, gathering his papers. If the HOA won't do its job, I'll find another way. The following day, Jonathan hired a professional surveyor. Watching the man meticulously measure and record every inch of the property, Jonathan felt a flicker of hope. The results, as expected, confirmed that Rick's fence was encroaching on his land. Armed with this new evidence, Jonathan approached Rick, who was lounging on his patio. Rick, he began, holding up the survey results, this proves your fence is on my property. You need to remove it. Rick glanced at the paper and laughed. Go ahead and try to fight me in court, Jonathan. I've got better lawyers than you could dream of. Jonathan clenched his jaw and walked away. Rick's arrogance was infuriating, but Jonathan wasn't about to let him win. Standing in his yard, staring at the fence cutting through what was rightfully his, Jonathan made a decision. He would fight back, no matter how long it took. Jonathan paced his living room, the survey results clutched tightly in his hand. He knew he needed support, someone who could help him navigate the overwhelming frustration of standing up against Rick's smug arrogance and the HOA's indifference. With a determined breath, he decided to speak to his neighbors. That afternoon, Jonathan went door to door, sharing his story and asking if anyone else had experienced similar issues with Rick. To his surprise, the responses were immediate and eye-opening. "Oh, Rick," one elderly neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, said with a shake of her head. "He's been a thorn in this neighborhood for years. Last summer, he tried to plant trees right up against my fence and called it landscaping improvements. Took weeks to get him to stop." Another neighbor, a middle-aged man named Mark, revealed a more troubling story. Rick manipulated the HOA's rules to push through an addition to his house, claimed it was for community improvement, but everyone knew it was just for his personal gain. The pattern was clear. Rick's behavior wasn't an isolated issue. He had been using loopholes, intimidation, and his connections with the HOA to push his agenda for years. This realization gave Jonathan a new sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for his land, he was standing up for everyone Rick had wronged. Encouraged by his neighbors' support, Jonathan reached out to Amanda Clark, a local lawyer known for her expertise in property disputes. Amanda was sharp, focused, and most importantly, genuinely invested in helping him. "First things first," Amanda said, spreading out the documents on her desk. "We need to build a case that's airtight. That means documenting everything, photos of the fence, your surveys, and any correspondence with Rick or the HOA. The more evidence we have, the stronger our position." Jonathan spent the next week meticulously gathering proof. He photographed the fence from every angle, highlighting how it encroached on his yard. He collected statements from his neighbors, detailing Rick's past behavior. Amanda even suggested recording any future interactions with Rick, provided they complied with local laws. But the breakthrough came when Amanda decided to dig deeper into the HOA's archives. After hours of sifting through old meeting minutes and property records, she found a crucial piece of evidence, an overlooked HOA memo from years ago. The memo detailed the exact property boundaries for Jonathan's lot and explicitly stated that the disputed area was not part of Rick's land. Amanda's eyes lit up as she handed the document to Jonathan. "This," she said, "is the missing puzzle piece. It proves that Rick's claim is not just baseless, it's entirely fabricated." Holding the memo, Jonathan felt a surge of hope. For the first time since this ordeal began, he saw a clear path to justice. With Amanda's help, he formally filed a lawsuit against Rick, confident that the evidence they had gathered would finally expose the truth. As he left Amanda's office, Jonathan glanced at the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It reminded him that even the darkest battles eventually give way to light. Rick might have underestimated him, but Jonathan knew one thing for sure. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. The courtroom was hushed, its air filled with an unspoken tension. Jonathan sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly together as though holding on to his resolve. Beside him, Amanda Clark organized their stack of evidence, her calm demeanor a reassuring presence. Across the aisle, Rick lounged back with a smug expression, his expensive suit and confident posture radiating arrogance. The judge entered and the proceedings began. Rick's attorney wasted no time, confidently arguing that the case was baseless. "The boundary lines are ambiguous at best," he declared, pacing before the bench. "My client acted in good faith, relying on available HOA maps." Jonathan's stomach tightened. For a moment, the lawyer's words hung in the air, creating a flicker of doubt. But then Amanda stood, her voice clear and measured. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that there is nothing ambiguous about this case." She turned to the court, laying out the survey results and Jonathan's meticulously kept property records. Amanda presented the HOA memo next, the paper trembling slightly in her hand, not from nerves, but from the weight of its importance. This document, created by the HOA itself, explicitly defines the property boundaries. It clearly places the disputed area within Mr. Rivers' land. Jonathan watched as the judge leaned forward to examine the memo, his expression shifting from neutrality to interest. A spark of hope ignited in Jonathan's chest. Rick's lawyer tried to regain control, questioning the memo's relevance and attempting to cast doubt on the survey's accuracy, but Amanda was prepared. She introduced a surprise piece of evidence, a signed affidavit from one of Rick's former contractors. "This affidavit," Amanda began, her voice steady, "is from a contractor who worked on the fence. He confirms that Mr. Turner explicitly instructed him to stretch the boundaries during construction, despite knowing it was beyond his property." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jonathan stole a glance at Rick, whose smug grin had been replaced with a tight-lipped frown. The judge turned to Rick's attorney. "Do you have any response to this?" he asked, his tone sharp. The lawyer stammered, but it was clear the case was slipping through his fingers. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm. "The evidence is clear. Mr. Turner knowingly constructed a fence on land that does not belong to him. This court orders the immediate removal of the fence at Mr. Turner's expense. Additionally, Mr. Turner is to pay damages to Mr. Rivers for emotional distress and cover all legal fees." Jonathan felt a wave of relief wash over him. The verdict was everything he had hoped for. He glanced at Amanda, who gave him a small, victorious nod. As the gavel struck, the room erupted into quiet murmurs. Rick stormed out, his arrogance replaced by visible frustration. But Jonathan stayed seated for a moment, letting the reality sink in. Justice had prevailed. Walking out of the courtroom, Jonathan felt lighter than he had in weeks. The sun was shining, and for the first time since this ordeal began, he felt like he could truly breathe again. The fence would come down, and with it, the weight of Rick's audacity. Jonathan's land, and his peace of mind, had been restored. The hum of machinery echoed through the crisp morning air as workers began dismantling the fence. Jonathan stood on his porch, watching the tall wooden structure that had been a symbol of frustration and defiance slowly come apart. With every panel removed, a weight seemed to lift from his chest. The workers moved efficiently, but not without the occasional glance toward Rick's property. Rick himself was nowhere to be seen. After weeks of posturing and arrogance, his silence was almost louder than any words. Jonathan suspected that the sting of public defeat, combined with the court's verdict, had finally humbled his neighbor, or at least silenced him for now. As the final post was pulled from the ground, Jonathan's backyard returned to its original, open state. He couldn't help but smile. The grass looked brighter, the space wider. It was as though the land itself had been holding its breath, waiting for justice to be served. But the resolution didn't stop there. Word of the court case had spread quickly through the neighborhood, sparking conversations at every mailbox and on every porch. Residents began to voice long-held frustrations about the HOA's leadership. Many were tired of Martha Grayson's favoritism and her pattern of ignoring legitimate complaints. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and this time the room was packed. Jonathan attended, though he stayed near the back, letting others take the lead. Neighbors shared their stories: unfair fines, ignored maintenance requests, and of course, Rick's unchecked behavior. By the end of the meeting, a vote was held. Martha was removed as president, replaced by a new leader who promised transparency and fairness. Jonathan couldn't deny the satisfaction he felt as he walked home that night. It wasn't just about his victory, it was about the community finding its voice. The neighborhood had been under the shadow of unchecked authority for too long, and now it felt like a brighter, more cooperative future was possible. The following weekend, Jonathan invited his closest neighbors over for a small backyard gathering. The space felt different now, freer, lighter, and alive with laughter and conversation. As he grilled burgers and listened to the stories and jokes of his friends, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just about winning a court case. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter how daunting the odds. The fight had been exhausting, but it reminded Jonathan of the power of persistence and the strength of a united community. As the evening wound down, Jonathan took a moment to step back and look at his yard. The grass was soft under his feet. The tree line swayed gently in the breeze, and the faint hum of crickets filled the air. His backyard, once a battlefield of disputes, had returned to being a sanctuary. For Jonathan, this victory wasn't just about reclaiming his land. It was about proving that fairness and determination could triumph, even against those who seemed untouchable. The satisfaction of knowing that his stand had inspired others made every step of the struggle worth it. And as the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jonathan smiled, feeling not just peace but pride. This was his home, his legacy, and no one could take that away from him.